Welcome class back to Chapter 4, Designing Web Pages with CSS. This is the second video lecture where we'll cover the objectives, explain the difference between inline and block content, describe and use the CSS box model to apply margins, padding, and borders, and create an external style sheet and link it to an HTML page. So in this video lecture, we'll be doing some practical. So we'll actually be doing some coding inside of Fitness. And so what I will do is enter in my code, but I'll be pausing the video as I do that so I don't use up video time having you watch me type. So we'll begin by looking at understanding inline elements and block elements. So remember, the term element is kind of referring to an HTML tag. So a block element appears as a block because it starts and ends with a new line, such as the main element or a paragraph element. And an inline element are displayed without line breaks, so they flow within the same line. Inline content always appears within block elements. So for example, looking inside of our textbook, we can see some examples of inline elements, because I kind of think we'll probably understand what block means, as in that it's got that blank line most likely before it and a blank line most likely after it. So what is actually meant by inline? So some examples of that are the anchor tag. So when we embed a link into our page, it just flows from left to right, depending on the screen resolution and how it will wrap. And the same thing goes for span. Typically the same thing will happen for the image tag as well. Next, we'll look at the CSS box model. So this is one of the most important things that you can understand, is the box model. So a block element, such as our header tag, nav, main, footer, paragraph, H1, H2, H3, all fall inside of this box model. So we can think of the content is kind of like an object, like a box on our page. So the CSS box model describes content boxes on a web page. So here's our content. The padding is between the content and the border of that box, and we can specify these properties. And then from the border to the top is what we call a margin. And the margin, just like border and padding, all have top, left, right, and bottom properties. And we can set those in a variety of different ways. So again, jumping back into your textbook in table 4-4, so these are some of the common CSS box model properties. And so we got the margin, the padding, and then we have border. So margin sets again the amount of space around the block element, so from the border and kind of away from the border of that box. Padding, the amount of space between the content and the border of that box. And then border is going to actually format or style that box. And so these are all of the different ways that we can do that. So some examples, and they talk about this right prior to this. And so how can we code these? So here is one example. If I want my margins to be 2em, so 2em would be 100% bigger, okay, than the normal margin. We all have default, all of our elements have default margins, padding, and borders. Okay, so with this one, we're saying we want this to be 200% bigger than our normal margin that would be, say, set for the body element, or maybe for the paragraph element. So this one would be, when we specify 1, that's going to encompass top, bottom, and left and right. So when we're looking at that box, you want to think of it as top is first number, then it goes over to the right, then it goes to bottom, and then it wraps up here on the left. So if we're specifying all 4 numbers, they go in this order as far as specification is concerned. In this case, it's going to be 2em all the way around, even margins. Now we can specify different margins for the sides. So in this example, top and bottom are going to be the default, but I'm going to adjust the left and the bottom to be these numbers. Okay, and then we have shorthand. So we have just a single margin, and so this is going to mean that top and bottom are 1 EM and right and left are 2 EM. It takes a little bit of practice as you go through these. So this one right here means that top is going to be 2 EM. This is going to be left and right, and since that third one is there, that is referring to the bottom margin. So if we had another one beyond this, then it would be going and affecting that left margin. So top, left and right, since right is not there, and then also bottom. And then here we have all 4 of them. And then border has this shorthand way of doing it. So where we specify what kind of line do we want, what kind of border, what's the size of it, and the color. And then we can specify like border left width down here. We have all of these. So there's a lot of things that we can do with the box model. And what I want to show you is back to W3 schools. Okay, so if we just come over here, we can go ahead and look at box model and talks more about that. If we want to get into CSS borders, we can look at CSS borders, and you can see there's even rounded, and this talks about border style. So I can't cover everything when it comes to all of these. So here's border width, but if we jump into CSS margins, it talks about all the different ways that we can mess around with margins, and there's even margin collapse, and then there's padding here as well, and what padding is, and then the properties that it has, and you can go ahead and play with those. So again, I'm not going to cover all of them. It's just going to be something that you're going to kind of have to do a trial and error. You can do it, try yourselves out this way. So in my first lecture video, I talked about how we can incorporate CSS styles. I talked about the inline, where we put it inside of the tag as an attribute. Talked about embedded or page styles that affect just one page within the style tags. And then this is that third one, the external one. And this is the preferred one because this is where we can modify one document. And it might be multiple CS files, to be 100% honest, but we can modify it in that, and then it'll affect all of the pages that are linked to that CSS style sheet. So we're going to look at some examples in the book of how to code this, and then we're going to go ahead and practice them in our fitness website. Before we jump back into the book, let's look at selectors. So I mentioned before in video 1 that selector could be an HTML tag, HTML element. It could be an ID attribute or a class attribute. So IDs are going to be prefixed with the hashtag. The class is going to be prefixed with a period. And then a descendant selector is used to create a style that applies to an element contained within another element. So then we got to think about how our file is structured, meaning we have child elements inside of parent elements. So an example of that might be main, and then within main we have a header 1, or maybe within main we have a paragraph, and maybe one of those paragraphs has an ID assigned to it. And the tree could be whatever it is for your particular web page. So here is an example of a CSS code, okay, a CSS rule. So in my external style sheet, this could be the very top of my document. Most often you'll probably have some comments at the top, but this could be my very first rule that I would insert in my CSS style sheet. So looking at figure 4-10 in your textbook, you'll see that here is that body, and it corresponds to this body tag. Then we have hashtag exercises, which means this has an ID assigned to it. So div ID exercises. And then here is a class selector, which is prefixed with a period, and it's corresponding to this one that says class equal external dash link. They are case sensitive, so however you assign them in your HTML file is how you're going to code them here in the CSS file. On the next page in your document, you will see the nav. Okay, so our nav tag being formatted using an unordered list. We'll get into the structure of that a little later in this video. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to do this section here to create a CSS file, and a style rule for the body element. So what we're going to do is just create a file called styles.css, and then we're going to go ahead and enter in some CSS properties in there. In VS Code, I'm going to go ahead and click on this CSS folder here, and then I'm going to go ahead and click on New File, and then I'll just type in styles.css. When you're coding, make sure that you end all CSS properties and their values with a semicolon. So if you go ahead and add more in, you're not going to accidentally forget that semicolon. So we would go ahead and save this file. And so now we have a style sheet that we'll be able to attach to any of our HTML files that we want to be styled. So we're opening up the index file, and following the meta tag is where we're going to go ahead and put this link. Okay, and we have a relationship attribute that we'll put in style sheet, and then further from that is where the path is at. So we'll do hypertext reference, CSS folder, styles.css. Oh, I missed an F on hypertext reference. And then our closing bracket there. So we'll give it a save, and then we'll come over to our web browser to test, and we can open up a new tab, and then I want you to open with Control O, navigate to your fitness folder. Okay, so navigating to the index file, okay, and this is what I see here, and now I have that gray background. So the next step is to copy this link tag and to place it into all of our files, so about, contact, and template. Same position. So with those links added, I'm going to go ahead and click on about. I have that gray background, and the other one was contact us that we worked with. These two pages we haven't developed yet. Next, we'll look at the section titled Creating a Web Page Layout. So this is where we're going to look at the float and the clear properties. So this is used to kind of design a web page layout. So the float property has values of left, right, inherit, and none. And then the clear property has the values of right, left, and both. Reviewing our wireframe for our Forward Fitness Club homepage, we have our header, and then we have our navigation within our header, and we have a div, and we have some main content footer. So how can we use these properties that we just looked at to go ahead and modify and kind of get into our wireframe layout that we want? So here is header. We can specify it to have a float of left and a width of 25%, and then nav is going to float to the right. We add a little bit of margins onto it. So again, this would be top. This is going to be right, bottom, and left. So since we put 3EM on there on the right, we kind of have to think about that in my 100%. So you'll see 25% and 70%, that equates to 95%. And then when we have this, we can kind of think about it as the other 5%. If you were to change this to 5 or 75%, that's 3EM is going to essentially break the layout, and you're going to start wrapping things down onto the next portion of the web page, just because there's not enough space from left to right. So whenever you use margins on the left or right, any type of box, you have to really think about the space that you're taking up of that 100%, and that goes based on resolution. Now what we're learning here in this chapter is not the all. We'll be learning how we can work with responsive design mobilely, desktop and tablet wise in the upcoming chapters. So let's head back into our styles.css file, and let's enter in the code, and that is on pages 163 through the top of page 165. As you're working through entering these styles, I want you to kind of enter them in kind of one at a time. So here's the header information, and I actually could just do with 25% and test it, but we'll do both of them at this time. Make sure you save the file and then come back over to your web page and do a refresh so you can actually see what is being styled based on that new CSS rule that you came up with. So this is the header, floating it to the left and telling it only to take up 25% of the space based on this resolution. Let's go ahead and enter in the nav information next. Okay, code for the nav. So again, width of 75%, let's float it over to the right, and then here are our margins. So let's see what is going on with this one. Okay, so here's our nav. Okay, I believe it's kind of pushing it down just because of my resolution in this video. Let's go ahead and enter in the main style next. So here's our style for main, and here is clear, and what this states is the left margin must be clear of content, okay, before I'm going to write out the main tag and all the content that's within main. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and temporarily take this out. I'm going to do a little save. I'm going to refresh my page back. So this is what it looked like before. I'm going to go ahead and put it back in and refresh my page. Okay, so main is this information right here. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and refresh it, and notice it's pushed down now because the left margin has to be clear, and it wasn't with this here before it will write out the content. That's what the clear property does. So the next section of styling talks about structural elements, and we're going to be looking at the navigation as one of those structural elements. And so we're going to use a list for navigation links. Now I mentioned this when we were covering chapter 3, taking those navigations with the characters that we're using out of a paragraph, and then we put it in a list. Because essentially a menu is a list, and so it kind of makes sense semantic wise to go ahead and do it this way. So what we're going to do is we're going to do our whole menu system. We're going to wrap it with some LIs. Okay, and then on the outside of it would be our unordered list. You can go ahead and remove the non-breaking spaces and the characters. So I've entered here in the index file my unordered list. So I'm going to go ahead and take the close of that. I'm going to place it over the closing p tag. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that's indented. And then I started an LI here, and I'm going to go ahead and tab this in so we got good structure there. I would go ahead and just do these LIs all the way down. Okay, you can also do it this way where you take this one, cut it, paste it here, remove this at the end. There's so many ways that you could go about doing this. I'm going to do the same thing here. Just make sure it's after the closing anchor tag. And then I could also just streamline the process by copying this, pasting it here, paste. And again, if it does end in indentation that's unnecessary, just go ahead and fix it. I can do the same thing here. And we definitely need a closing LI here, even though we don't have those non-breaking space and characters. So essentially, again, we're making a list of our menu items so that we can go ahead and format it with CSS. Now you'll want to make sure that you go ahead and copy this from page to page. So looking at about, I'm just going to paste right over the nav. Same thing with contact and the template. So we want to have that structure to reference the same for all of those. I'll do a save all, get all those saved. So looking at our home page, we can see that it looks like this now. And again, that's not how we're going to leave it. We are going to go ahead and remove these bullets. We're going to be making sure this goes horizontal and things like that when it comes to styling our list. So from the book, we have a couple examples of CSS list properties. We have the unordered list where we can say list style type, and they have square here. This one we could say none, where we don't want to have the bullets. Or we could change it to upper Roman when it comes to an ordered list. We can even work with an image as well. So let's look at back to our W3 schools, and we can look at CSS lists. Okay, let's see if we have any examples of in here of navigation. Here's a list style, type none. Okay, so nothing with regards to navigation, but we jump down here, we got a CSS navigation bar. So there's a nice tutorial when it comes to this from the W3 schools. So this should look familiar to you. Unordered list, okay, LI to LI. Okay, and we're going to go through doing this in our code. Okay, and I will actually be giving you a tutorial to actually convert yours for your personal portfolio website. I'm going to hold off not doing that right now. When we get more into the mobile side of things, we'll work with that tutorial. So let's style our new unordered list, and we're going to be working with pages 169 and 170. When you're entering in these styles, try to keep them in the order of the structure of your page. So when you're looking at the structure, you can go and look at the CSS style and they'll be in the same order. So we'll tuck this nav UL, and so what this means is every unordered list that's inside of the parent nav, these are the styles that are going to be applied to it. Okay, so we're going to remove that bullet, we're going to remove the margins, and we're going to push it over to the right. So upon refreshing our page, now our menu is over here. So let's continue to add in some styling, and this styling is on page 170, and this is going to affect our LI element, and that LI is within our nav, and we're going to be working with making it a inline block with a display property, and I'll explain a little bit more on that. So referring to W3 schools, looking at CSS inline block, it gives us the definition. If we change inline block for our list items, instead of them being vertical, it's going to change them to horizontal. So let's go ahead and make sure that I have saved this. Okay, and the font size is going to increase by 75%. So let's jump here and refresh, and now I have my horizontal menu. So let's go ahead and continue to now style the anchor tags within them. Okay, so nav LIA display block is going to change our anchors from an inline element to a block element. So we got that spacing before and after that horizontal line, and then we have white. Text align of center. We added some padding on the top and bottom of 0.5 EM and on the right and left of 1 EM. And then we're going to go ahead and remove the underlining that normally happens with a hyperlink. So I am going to go ahead and save this file, come over and refresh. Okay, and now I have my navigation. Doesn't look like too terrible of a navigation for a desktop environment. So let's look at CSS layout, the display property. So I was looking at the inline block earlier, and here is the CSS display. So all of the different values that you can have for the display property, and here is block, displays an element as a block element. So to finish up this video, we'll just kind of summarize some of the things. So again, float has left, right, inherit, and none properties. If you need more explanation on those, go to W3 schools. They do a great job of explaining. Clear property, right, left, and both, and again that affects the margin. Whatever you're trying to put on that margin, the margin has to be clear before that particular box will be written to the screen. And then we have text align center. So in this case, we will center our header 1. We generally center on the page. If you're centering elements and you want to think of a rule, set the width to 80%, leave about 20% of your page for margins. Remember that things can do that float slip, where if we try to expand our page to 105% and we don't have the space for it, things like that will happen. Rules header appears at the top, nav should be formatted differently from other structural elements. We put it in an unordered list. And each page contains different content within the main element. And so when we're looking at our wireframe, we're looking at our template. Generally, we're not going to put anything in that main section in our template environment because we're going to want each of those pages to be different, especially when it comes to search engine optimization. CSS list properties, and then this making responsive images, we're going to talk about that in the next video. So up to this point, not really anything I want you to continue with the assignments. I want you to cover a little bit more material with me in the videos. Just make sure that your fitness pages are all displaying the same. So if we come back here and we click on About, same thing with the header, and our menu is all good. So that's the consistency you want there. Any questions on anything that's talked about in this video, please reach out.